I didn't want to go, but they insisted. Something about that factory bothered me from the start, but no one believed me when I said we were being watched, until it was too late.
I never believed in urban legends. I always thought they were stories made up to scare kids or add some charm to a small town like ours. But everything changed when we started hearing about the man with the mirror mask. At first, it was just rumors, whispers at the corner cafe or during history class in high school. Someone always knew someone who had seen the man. A tall, elegant figure in a black suit with a mask made of mirror fragments that seemed to shine even in the dark. My group of friends, Lucas, Helena, and Arthur, were naturally curious, especially when it came to mysteries. Lucas suggested we use our old camera and record an amateur documentary about the legend. The idea seemed silly at first, but the excitement soon took over. Helena was the most skeptical of us, but even she admitted it would be fun to explore something different. Arthur, on the other hand, was convinced the stories were real and couldn't wait to meet the guy, as he nervously joked. Our investigation started innocently enough. We spent hours in the local library, digging through old articles about disappearances in town. We discovered that, over the decades, people had really vanished without a trace, always after claiming to have seen a strange man. In many cases, the victims were young, like us, which added an uncomfortable weight to our curiosity. We decided to talk to Mrs. Miller, an elderly woman who lived on the outskirts of town and claimed to have encountered the man when she was young. Her house smelled of mold, and the living room was filled with old furniture covered in dust. She greeted us with a distant look, as if reliving some trauma just by hearing us mention the subject. "He's not a person," she said in a trembling voice. "He's a reflection. He shows you what you're afraid to face." Her words sent shivers down my spine, but Arthur chuckled softly, as if it was just another rambling from an old woman. "Even so," she warned us, "if you look for him, he'll find you first." After we left her house, the group's excitement diminished. Something about Mrs. Miller's tone felt more serious than anything else we had heard. But that night, we decided to move forward with our plans. The first stop would be the old abandoned factory at the edge of town, where some witnesses claimed to have seen the man. We arrived around 10 at night, armed with flashlights, the camera, and, honestly, a lot of fake courage. The factory was huge, with broken windows and graffiti covering the outer walls. As we walked, Helena found something shiny on the ground, a small fragment of a mirror. "This is too much of a coincidence," she whispered, clutching the shard in her fingers. At that moment, a chill ran down my spine. It felt like we were being watched. The silence around us seemed alive, heavy. Without realizing it, we had already stepped into his game. As we crossed the rusted gate of the factory, an uneasy feeling washed over me. It wasn't just the oppressive silence or the darkness that our flashlights barely managed to penetrate. It was something more. It was as if the air was heavy, charged with something we couldn't explain. Arthur led the group with his usual confidence, but even he seemed more cautious than usual. The factory's corridors were a maze of shadows and debris. Every step made the sound of our footsteps echo, creating the impression that we weren't alone. Helena kept the mirror shard she'd found firmly in her hand, as if it were some kind of talisman. Lucas, always holding the camera, filmed everything, commenting on the marks on the walls. Graffiti that looked like eyes, all staring at us. "This is starting to freak me out," Helena murmured, breaking the silence. I was about to respond when something caught our attention. A metallic sound, like the dragging of chains, coming from a room at the end of the hallway. We froze for a few seconds, exchanging nervous glances. "Must be the wind," Arthur suggested, trying to sound confident. But we all knew there was no wind there. Lucas, eager to capture something interesting, moved forward with the camera, and we reluctantly followed him. The room was large, filled with rusted machinery and abandoned parts. In the center, there was an old chair with something hanging off the back, a piece of black fabric, similar to a suit. "Okay, this is getting weird," Lucas said while filming. I approached the chair, feeling a mix of curiosity and fear. When I reached out to touch the fabric, I heard Helena gasp behind me. The mirror, it changed. Turning around, I saw that the shard she was holding no longer reflected the environment around us. Instead, it showed something strange. A silhouette standing far in the distance, at the end of the hallway we had just come from. "That's not possible," I murmured, trying to stay calm. Arthur shone his flashlight down the hallway, but there was nothing there. Still, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the factory. They seemed close, but at the same time, they came from all directions. Lucas spun around with the camera, trying to locate the source, but the sound stopped as abruptly as it had started. "I think we should leave," Helena suggested, almost pleading. But before we could move, a low, guttural laugh filled the air. It was hard to tell where it was coming from, but it seemed to be all around us. The chair in the center of the room, which had been still moments before, was now turned, as if someone had just sat in it. "We need to get out of here. Now," I said, my voice trembling. Without a second thought, we began to back away. But the factory felt different, as if it were trapping us in a maze with no way out. We ran through the factory corridors, trying to find the exit, but everything seemed to shift around us. It was as if the space was alive, conspiring to keep us inside. The sound of our footsteps was accompanied by something else, footsteps that didn't belong to any of us. Arthur led the way, but even he was visibly shaken. "I swear it was this way," he said, his voice trembling as he swung the flashlight around. "The factory isn't this big," Helena shouted, panting. Lucas, still holding the camera, turned back, shining his flashlight down the empty corridor. I knew he was trying to stay rational, but the fear in his eyes was undeniable. Suddenly, his flashlight flickered, and he stopped. "Did you see that?" he asked, staring intently at the camera screen. I moved closer and looked. In the footage, we could see the silhouette of a figure standing at the far end of the corridor behind us, motionless. But when we turned to look with our own eyes, there was nothing there. "This doesn't make sense," I murmured, feeling my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. The low, guttural laughter returned, echoing through the corridors. This time, it was closer. Lucas turned off the camera. His hand was shaking. "We're not alone," he whispered. Finally, we found a door that looked like it led outside. Arthur grabbed the handle and tried to force it open, but it was locked. As he struggled with it, Helena screamed. When I looked at her, I realized what had happened. The mirror shard in her hand now reflected our images, but they were wrong. Each reflection was distorted, grotesque. Mine had pitch black, empty eyes. Before we could react, the flashlights began to flicker. The sound of something heavy being dragged echoed louder and louder. In the shard's reflection, the man with the mirror mask appeared, walking toward us. "Don't look at him," Helena screamed, throwing the shard to the ground, shattering it into pieces. The sound stopped for a moment, but the sense of danger remained. In a fit of desperation, Arthur managed to force the door open, and we all ran outside, not daring to look back. Outside, the fresh air felt almost unreal. We were sweaty, out of breath, and completely silent. None of us dared to talk about what we had seen. Lucas, however, checked the camera. The footage was there, but the parts where the man should have appeared were distorted, as if the recording itself had been corrupted. That night, each of us returned home in silence, but something had changed. I felt like we hadn't completely left the factory. It was as if a part of us was still trapped inside, under the gaze of the man with the mirror mask. And deep down, I knew he wasn't done with us. Not yet.